Every man has his heroes, and every life is made up of stories. Heroic Stories is a series from heroicmen.org to find out why some men choose the harder path in life, even when it means losing everything, how they survived, and who they are today. These men seem heroic to us, even if they don't call themselves that. They seem to have an extra strength in their system, extra grit to battle doubt and find purpose. All of these men are seeking divine friendship with God, and they all believe in building up faith, building up men, and building up our future. Sponsored by CatholicSpeakers.com and hosted by Dominic from Heroic Men, get the mindsets, the scars, and the playbooks that these men have earned the hard way. Heroism isn't born, it's made, and these are their stories. Hi friends, and welcome back to Heroic Stories. I'm fortunate today to be joined by Dr. Curry Myers, known as America's Criminologist. Welcome, Doctor. Good to have you with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be on. Thanks so much.
So I'll ask you, well, it'll end up coming out as we get into this conversation more about what it is you do and some of your background in law enforcement, which is really fascinating. But we have 4 questions that we go through, and they all are centered around this sense of heroism, and sometimes it's a difficult conversation, but it's always a rewarding one. So let's kick everything off. First question I love to ask people is, what is a story of heroism that absolutely lights you up? It's you're gathering around with friends, it's a fireplace, and then everyone's sharing stories about either moments in history or in the news or people that they've known or stories, books they've read. A moment of heroism that absolutely lights you up.
Well, it's my grandfather, the man that I never met. I never had the opportunity to meet any of my grandparents. They had passed before I was born. But my grandfather on my dad's side was a poor sharecropper. This is in the 1930s. My dad was a burgeoning young athlete. He had gotten a scholarship to go play football. Back in those days, this would have been now the beginning of the 1980s. And my grandfather had been a sharecropper ever since the Depression occurred and never really got out of that kind of funk, if you will, from the 30s on. And so he and his grandmother and my dad and my aunt, who I didn't know very well either, lived on another farmer's ranch, basically, and was given a cabin, and they shared the land. And by the time they did work for the sharecropper, most of that money went back to the farmer, rightfully so, because he offered them any kind of food and shelter. So they didn't have too much. But my dad was a very intelligent man and a good athlete and had an opportunity. But he could not get to college. He had to be able to afford to be able to buy a car, to be able to go down and attend college. And my father, I never knew, sold his only prized possession, which was his mule, and gave that money to my father so he could buy a very rudimentary car to be able to make the trip to college, to be able to accept his scholarship, start playing football. And as a result of that selfless act by my grandfather, it changed our family tree. My dad went on to become someone who graduated, became basically an engineering geologist, worked for the United States Army, Corps of Engineers as a civilian, and built most of the lakes across the Midwest after the 1951 flood, and was responsible for building most of the dams and reservoirs as a result. That act basically put us in a position where my dad was able to escape that extreme poverty and was able to change our family tree. And it's continued on today to be able to have an impact on my children and hopefully our great-grandchildren down the road. So it may not be an important heroic action in terms of fighting the enemy, but it was a course of action. It was a decision made that was a course of action on our entire family that was able to change the direction of who we are and what we are.
Gosh, amazing little moment that changed the course of history for you. And I'm sure for all the people that you go on to impact, what's your takeaway from that? Because like you say, looking back at that now, you say it doesn't feel like a big deal. I imagine if all you have is the mule and the conditions that you live in, that's a significant thing to lose. 60 years later, 100 years later or something, we look back and think, well, it doesn't mean the same thing today that it does back then. Yeah. What's your takeaway from something like that? I guess maybe the question is around, doing small, seemingly small things that maybe mildly or hard in the moment or nobody else appreciates or something? How do you build a life around those kinds of decisions where things that you may not even realize can matter? Do you see where I'm kind of going
Yeah,
with
no,
maybe a question like
absolutely.
that?
And it's a great question. And I reflect on St. Joseph in this time. I mean, if you look at St. Joseph and the wonderful person that he was, I mean, he was a humble servant that answered God's call, was someone who helped formed Jesus Christ by being there and teaching him how to grow, teaching him the prayers that was needed. And he sacrificed. He was able to get them out of, take the cross the desert and escape to Egypt when trouble arose. He was situationally aware all the time for both Mary and Jesus to protect them, and he was able to provide for them. And I think of Saint Joseph. I think of he was my grandfather. According to my father, was not a religious man at all. In fact, wasn't really that good of a man in terms of loving, being a loving father to my dad. My dad was totally different to me, but that sacrifice was an amazing sacrifice. But I automatically think of Saint Joseph and the sacrifices that were done, and that these sacrifices can import themselves on many fathers across the world on making just those little things
Yeah.
that can occur, that can change the direction of your family, or that can protect your family from harm's way or evil that's out there. So that's what I think of. I reflect on really the liturgy of St. Joseph when I think about that act.
Amazing. I want to ask you in a couple of minutes about the kind of life that what you've gone on to do now because of a decision like that. But
Mhm.
I'm curious if you know anything more about your grandfather, because like you said he maybe wasn't even a very good man. He certainly wasn't religious. What do you think? Why do you think he had it in him to make a decision like that? Maybe was it easy for him to do? I mean, maybe I'm misreading the story, or it was a difficult thing to do. Why do you think he went and did it?
Well, it was definitely difficult. It was really his only possession, and he was using it to help till the soil on that land. He had a
That's what I
little carve
figured.
out of land, so it was a significant sacrifice, and certainly didn't have the money to buy another mule. I think he loved his son, but we all love differently. He was a very stoic German figure, so wasn't necessarily the outwardly going, loving, you know, type person that was there. But I think he knew that this was an opportunity for his son, and
Mhm.
knew that that opportunity could very well escape poverty and open a door to something else. I can't put myself in his place to know how deeply he thought about that, but he certainly,
Mhm.
it certainly had to cross his mind that this was something that should be done in order to put his son on a pathway to something he never had.
Amazing. Amazing. I'd like to hear more about some of your journey, but the entry question into all of that is what's the darkest decision or the most difficult decision that you yourself then have had to make? Perhaps inspired by a story like that. How has that impacted you? Was there a moment where you had to make some very difficult decision? What was that like?
Well, I mean, my life's been full of many difficult decisions and dangerous decisions. I am now a retired law enforcement officer after 24 years. I started out as a state trooper. I became a KBI special agent, Kansas Bureau of Investigation, was assigned to DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, for 5 years of that. I spent the vast majority of my career working undercover, major undercover operations. I then later did homicide investigations, and then ended up becoming the sheriff of Johnson County, Kansas, which is one of the larger sheriff's offices in one of the largest populations in Kansas. It's a suburb of Kansas City. But I was in the 1993 federal building shooting and bombing incident and survived that. The decision to take an active role, not a passive role, in that active shooter event, as made my way up to the stairs and the fourth floor to engage the shooter. It was only by God's grace that I didn't have to go any further, because what he had done, he had been let out on bail pending federal court for his charges. And he was, during that time period, for about a month or so, he was amassing a large cache of ammunition and was building pipe bombs and time delay bombs and gravity
Wow.
bombs, and attacked the federal courthouse that day when I happened to be in it at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And again, as I made my way up to the fourth floor to engage the shooter, he had set down his duffel bag too hard that had the bombs in it and basically blew himself up, and it ended the threat at that time. But it could have been a much different day than what it ended up being. But I decided to take on that threat as opposed to be passive and wait for people to come help. I was very blessed, and God's, St. Michael sent me 2 state troopers that came right at the right time as well. So right before we were getting ready to go up into those stairs, there were 2 state troopers that were with me, and which made it a lot easier because it's very lonely if you don't have don't have that kind of help that's right there to go with you. So I'd say that's one. And then there's many cases in life where I think probably the most important for me is I struggled, and in fact I was agnostic for many years. I think law enforcement, seeing the things that I saw, I believed in God. I believed in Christ, but it was what religion and whether or not it's very important was not necessarily on my agenda.
Right.
Until you're at your worst and you see things that you see. My wife was a stay-at-home mom at that time, and we were struggling on a law enforcement officer's salary. So on days that I was off, I went and palletized rock at which is basically wrapping rock to be put onto trucks to go for people's front yards across the United States. And as a result of that, I was despondent. I felt unworthy. I felt like I wasn't taking care of my family. Here I was, a special agent. At that time, I had been promoted, doing important cases, working homicides, death investigations, police shootings, and yet I couldn't make it financially. And here I'm spending time working for cash to palletize rock. And it was that day is when God spoke to me and said, "What are you waiting for? I'm here." And that's the beginning of that conversion story. And that I joined the Catholic Church, and it was through the prayers of my wife, who was a cradle Catholic, and my children. Unbeknownst to me, they had been doing the prayers to St. Jude, the saint of hopeless causes, during that entire period for the 13 years that I had been married to them, and they had continued those prayers. As we had more children, they were included in those prayers, and ultimately that door was open and I was able to convert. And then after that, it was another slow, steady increase in faith life and almost reigniting faith until just a few years ago when I decided to become more of a Catholic apologetic, if you will. And now I have a Substack that I focus on called the St. Michael's Group. .substack.com, and I write about apologetics and have a podcast. I'm in the middle of a 33-day litany to St. Joseph right now. So I have 2. That's the faith side of it. And then on the applied criminology, I have a Substack there that I do podcast and information on crime, criminology, and criminal justice issues that are out there today. But I've been very blessed, and I think the decision to go work in that rock house ended up, even though in my worst days and was at the worst of humility, that's when I was given the opportunity to finally meet Christ. So that was a very important decision that I made to go work in then. And perhaps it wasn't my decision, it was God's.
Yeah. Wow. You've just thrown out so many things there. I've way too many questions. And obviously I imagine there's a ton of possible stories to go over after an incredible career like that. I want to go back to something you did say. You talked about you were walking up those stairs, and that was an extremely difficult thing to do, and it could have gone very differently, very badly. And then you had the support of a couple of men at your back. You said some state troopers. Were you planning on going up those stairs even if they hadn't showed up?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That was the mission, was to take out that person. There wasn't really any other option. It was overwhelming from the things that he were doing. He had fired rounds, so he had left, again, through pipe bombs out where they were going off. He even put down pipe bombs that were time delay bombs that would go off later, or gravity bombs if you'd walk by them. and trigger a gravity. It could explode. They were all throughout the federal courthouse on that day. When he got out of his vehicle, it was a car bomb. He activated the car bomb, went into the federal courthouse, killed a deputy marshal, and made his way up the stairs. I just happened to be in the U.S. Attorney's office that day working on a case with one of the assistant U.S. attorneys. Just happened to be there by happenstance. And after I got the staff of the U.S. Attorney's office sheltered in the conference room, that's when I decided that I needed to go up and take on the threat.
So I'd like, if you're okay with it, I'd like to understand more about you and what was it that was in you that not impelled you, not the confidence, but just helped you realize this is the thing to do and it needs to be done. And like you said, there was no other option. I'm sure other men would have thought of other options or not done anything or waited for help or something. Seems like you didn't. What was in your life or your formation or in your heart, or what was in you that made you make a decision like that? I imagine you probably assumed you would lose your life, but there was a very strong chance of that.
Yeah, you certainly, I was still agnostic at this time, by the way. I hadn't converted, but it's interesting. I certainly was asking God to look over me I specifically remember that, asking God to let me see my children again. And here I am, agnostic on one side. It's amazing how and then, as the day ends, you think, oh, thank you very much. And then I go back to being kind of agnostic again as a result. Here's God saved you and gave you this opportunities, and you still weren't quite there yet. I was very well trained. I was a tactical operator for the KBI, and we trained often. I don't know, you never know what you're going to do and how you're going to react to those things. I just happened to react how I did, but I would hope it was based on the fact that I had a lot of training on what to do. I certainly had been in active shooter situations before, and arrest warrants, and served arrest warrants, and kidnapping scenarios and things like that, where our tactical team was used to be able to make people safe. So I was certainly used to those kind of chaotic emergency type situations. So I think, and then some people, and perhaps that's where I was at. Some people, when it's true emergencies, they get a little bit more focused. And, luckily that was me, where I got more focused and knew what I wanted to do, as opposed to, well, what do I do? What do I do? So it just depends on, I think, your training. I think really in those time periods, you rely on your training, and the training is what carries you through to be able to do what's the correct movement is.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a life lesson right there. What is that line? I think I heard from somebody else. You rise to the level of your preparation, or you fall to the level of your something. It sounds like that's for men going through hard times. And I want to come back and ask you about that conversion moment, because that actually got me. And I want to hear more about that, if that's okay. But the sense of prepping or preparing or doing almost any sort of training ahead of time sounds like a good thing, especially for men to do. Not every situation will be a shooter situation, but if there's any sort of preparation or training or forethought, probably puts you on a better footing for handling or responding to life or something like that. Would you say that that's a good mental habit or a good...
I completely 100% agree that I think body, mind, and spirit has to be formed, and you have to develop that. So the thing that lagged for me was the spirit, the faith side of it. The mind and body, by then I'd gone back I was working on my graduate school. I ended up getting a doctorate, ended up getting an MBA. So I had always been focused on mind, becoming better, becoming more educated, becoming more thoughtful in the work that I do, becoming more discerned better in what I do from a work point of view or from an academics point of view. So I felt like I had the mind side of it taken care of. The body side, I lifted weights, I worked out, I was on a tactical team, I was physically fit. And if you're physically fit, you're emotionally fit more than often, because you feel good about what you've done, how you're doing it. You feel like you can take on those threats. So you have to be fit. You have to be physically fit, and you have to be mentally fit to be able to take on threats. And it's not just going into an active shooter. We as men, it's the old iron sharpens iron philosophy. Right. We as men cannot become slovenly. We can't become sloths in the work that we do every day. We have to have the mindset that we have to think about how we're going to better ourselves from a mind point of view. Are we going to continue to grow in our intellect? Are we going to be physically fit? Because that's going to help our families. That's going to set a standard for our families. It's certainly going to set a standard for our children to emulate. Mm-hmm. And certainly for your son, if you have a son, that they want to emulate you because, hey, look at me. I'm working out. I study. These are the things that I do. But often where we fail, and where I failed for many years, is the faith side of it. The faith side of it requires the same type of discipline. It requires the workout. It requires the need to say your prayers, to do litanies, to understand that the devil is alive and well and prowls about this earth looking for the ruin of souls. And we have to be emotionally and spiritually fit to take on that battle and put on the armor of God to be able to protect our families, our wives, our children, and ourselves down the road. And the one thing I try to focus on now is that there are a lot of men especially, that may have one of those three things or two of those three things, but all three of those things are something that has to be the focus of who we are in order to be the father that we should be and emulate St. Joseph. Because remember, in many ways, St. Joseph was a special operator. I mean, he was probably the first
Say more. I love that point of view. Unpack that if you would.
Well, he helped his wife, Mary, and Jesus Christ, the Son of God, escape from evil. And he protected them along the way. And he had to trust. He had to trust the angels when they whispered in his ear. When he was told to move, he listened. He didn't hesitate. But at the same time, he had to have clarity. He had to be physically fit. He had to be emotionally fit. He certainly taught Christ the Psalms and the prayers, and as a carpenter taught him how to be formed in a profession, in a work. You know, all these things were done that, we don't know that much of Jesus before he's 30 years old, right? During that whole time period. We know he taught some but we don't know a whole lot about him. So Joseph had many years to help form Jesus Christ, but also protect him from harm's way, because we know that Satan certainly wanted to end his life and his minions like Herod and others. So I think it's mind, spirit, and body is the discipline that we don't all have to be a Navy SEAL. I'm not saying that, but what we should try to be is to make sure that we stay in good shape, that we stay mentally alert and learn and grow as we grow older. And our faith life is one of the most important things that we can do. 87% of fathers who are engaged in a faith life, who go to Mass, who take their children to Mass, their children will follow. And if you don't, if you're going to be a reserved father and a distant father and not engage with them, then they're not going to follow the formation that really God intended us to have.
So it sounds like, especially off of that last point right there, it sounds like you didn't get, maybe from your family or your father, some of that faith formation that might have made some things in your life easier, but it sounds like you ended up responding to the invitations. God found his way back into you. But it sounds like you said those 3 points of the mind and the body and the spirit. That moment where you said you had a conversion experience, lifting those rocks, palletizing? What's the word? For palletizing?
Yeah.
Palletizing the rocks. And you said that you felt like such a failure there. It seems like the first 2 doorways had been opened, or you had opened them or practiced with them, that set you up to be able to accept the third one. Because I think there's a lot of people today who are constantly challenged to pick up that third door, or to pick up that third spiritual, development. But there's no groundwork laid in terms of how to be a man at all. And we're not able to either stick with that spiritual call or know how to follow through. And I think some of us are gifted maybe the formation as men first, which I think is more vital than we realize, so that we can then follow that St. Joseph moment where the angel comes and goes, Christ is on a hit list. Get out of the country. For you, when you said you were feeling like that failure, well, I mean, I've not heard your conversion story, and maybe some of the men listening to this show haven't heard it either, but if you would take us to that moment, it sounds like you didn't feel like you had any other choices other than to be where you were. And then why was that faith response something that came out of what you were doing?
Well, I do want to give credit to my dad, because my dad was a very, very good man. He didn't follow in his dad's footsteps. He was a loving father, and he was great at formation. I was baptized. We went to a Methodist church, but it kind of had fallen off as I gotten older. But my dad, I think, formed me, especially from an intellect point of view, and he always stressed physical fitness. Now, he had gotten older, and he had gotten heavy as he had gotten older and not in good shape, but he always reminded me that I needed to go work out. It was that faith side of it. But luckily, I was married. I outkicked my coverage in my marriage and married a wonderful woman who grew up in a devout Catholic family. Her youngest sibling is a Dominican priest. I never discount the fact that she was praying for me for God to open the doors for me to take that next step. But one of the big moments for me is I had been working an undercover case, a major undercover case, when I was a DEA agent. And I'd been on this target for about 9 months or so, which isn't uncommon for a large undercover case. It may take a year or so to work big cases to go to a source of supply. And I had purchased numerous times from this person multi-ounces of cocaine. And we were going to do a final buy bust, which means I was going to ask for the full amount. They were going to go get it. I was going to do the transaction, and then my surveillance team would come in and we would arrest everybody, and that would be the end of the case, except for, working the parameters and doing interviews. Well, I had been meeting with this woman and man, husband and father, who were selling me the drugs for about 9 months. They were my main source of supply, and they were the ones that were going to introduce me to the big source of supply, which was a cartel person. And it was going to be for multi-pounds of cocaine. And when I asked for that, they didn't have it there, of course, but they left to go meet their source. And they left me there with their 4-year-old little boy and just left me. And they were gone for probably 45 minutes or so. And I just remember to myself, they have no idea that I'm actually a law enforcement officer, that I'm a caring father of my own. Actually, I had a 4-year-old son at home, which kind of resonated.
Did they not care about the child, or did they tacitly trust you, or was it a test?
It certainly wasn't a test. They cared about getting the money to be able to go do this deal so they could make money, And now I had known them for 9 months, but this is the first time they ever just left me, with their child. So they brought it back. It was a buy bust, successful. They got arrested. The little boy gets taken away because the mom and dad were both arrested. And taken away meaning they're going to go to social services, and because there's nobody else for them. But I was way out in western Kansas when this happened. And it took me a couple of days to get back home because we had to finish up the case, do reports, do interviews, things like that. But I remember driving home. It was late at night, and pulling up into what I called my white picket fence life, that I had this nice home, white picket fence. I had, at that time, 3 children, my wife, who by then was a stay-at-home mom, and I looked like a Hell's Angel. I had long hair, beard, rode a Harley. That was my persona. That's what I took on. I didn't she married me as a state trooper, which looks a totally different person, what I ended up becoming when I worked as an undercover agent. But I walked in and told her, I can't do this work anymore. I actually broke down because it was just like, I keep being put in these situations, and it shows the worst of society. And it's like, I just can't deal with it anymore. So I had luckily got promoted because I put in for promotion, and it was to the field where I was going to go work homicides and police shootings and that kind of stuff. A whole different, not. I
was going to say, is that any better?
Still difficult, but I could be a cop again, But no, I mean, I saw horrible things over there and worked some very bad cases, including significant homicide cases. But it was that moment that I realized that I had to do something different. And that was kind of the beginning of that push of, I'm lost. What do I need to do? And then all of a sudden, that leaving the undercover work, because I was with DEA had the money to be able to pay for unlimited overtime. And I went to the field, and this is a time in the 90s where there wasn't a lot of money. Law enforcement wasn't making a lot of money. So I probably took a $10,000, $15,000 hit.
Wow.
Monetarily by not getting overtime anymore. Huge. I mean, that's 1990 monies. It's a lot. And so it was one of those where that's when I decided I had to go work for cash off the books. And, I'd get $100 for every pallet that I'd put together. It would take most of the day to be able to put that pallet together. And it was hard work. You had to actually physically pick up the rocks, put them inside the pallet, shrink wrap them, and then help get them loaded onto the truck for the next one. And so it was backbreaking work. And I did it on my time off because as I'm now not getting overtime, I'm getting compensatory time, which means if I work overtime, I'm at home. I have to stay at home because I'm not getting, I'm getting paid time instead of money, basically. So I had a lot of time on my hands. And I'm thinking to myself, here I am, had way too much avarice, way too much pride. I was thinking what I was doing was beneath me. It was just another example. It was a way to give me humility to go do this kind of work. And I remember that one day when God spoke to me, and I had just finished eating. I'd forgotten to take any food with me. And everybody I worked with basically didn't speak English. And they were all meeting for lunch, and their wives would bring them food, and they had homemade tortillas and soups and all that kind of stuff. Well, they saw I didn't bring anything to eat. They invited me over to share their meal, and I ate with them. And of course, I didn't speak the language, but you can show appreciation. As I left and walked back to start working again, that's when God said, "What are you waiting for? I'm here." That's finished that shift. The very next morning, I went to the parish priest, who happened to be a friend of mine. I'd spent 13 years in the pews, just not being Catholic. I had gone. The one thing my dad taught me is he goes, you should go to your church with your family, even if you're not going to convert. And so I spent 13 years in the pew. I was involved in the dad's club. I coached my kids in CYO, even went through CCD fully, completely, and said, no, it's not for me.
Okay. In that walk back to your work, what was it that just made so much sense out of that experience of eating with those other coworkers? It seems like there was a meaning there that just became obvious to you. What was that? Was it fellowship or like breaking bread or
that's such a great
communion or?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Everything that's happened to me is because of the charism of hospitality. And these gentlemen provided hospitality to me in a time when I was at my worst and gave me an opportunity. My wife gave me a form of hospitality by praying for me, by not being critical of me. She didn't hound me because I hadn't become Catholic. She didn't prod me or chastise me because I didn't become Catholic. She was patient. Unbeknownst to me, she was saying those prayers to St. Jude, saint of hopeless causes, with my children. But she had a form of hospitality and welcoming me closer to the faith, even without pushing me towards it. Father had the charism of hospitality because when I told him that I was ready to join the church, he said, "Curry, I'm going to finish up here. I'm going to give you a call." And he called me and he said, "I tell you what, for the next 3 weeks, you've already been through CCD. For the next 3 weeks, I want to meet with you to help you discern if this is what you truly want to do." And he was a jovial Irish priest, great man, love him dearly. And we spent hours talking, conversing. He spent time with me, set up on his deck and had the occasional cigar and Irish whiskey, and would think about and talk about and discern about the Catholic faith and any questions that I might have. And then I came into the church quietly. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell my wife. I had a sponsor, and I came into the church quietly. And it was that following weekend, we had gone to visit my mom and dad, and I had gone to the Catholic church that was across the street from the Methodist church that I grew up. And that was the first time that I took communion with my family. I took communion, of course, when I came into the church the first time. But that was the first time I took communion with my family, and they were shocked.
Why did you keep it quiet from your family until that moment?
I didn't want to turn it into a big deal. And I thought
you wanted to feel like it was your own, own relationship.
I really thought that if I said that was what I was going to do, there was going to be a party, there was going to be, Curry's come into the church, let's have a dinner for him and let's do all that kind of stuff. And it just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel right. So, and again, I think God allows those things to appreciate it even more, because I learned things that I never would have learned in that surprise, in that surprise when my wife now, hey, by the way, I came into the church, when we were crying in the pews with my 3 other children, I would have missed that moment, that pure moment of fulfillment that we shared together, that we all kind of found out at the same time, or I shared with them at the same time. And then, learning things where she says, well, now she may have told me if I would have told her earlier, but then that's when she shared, we have been doing prayers to St. Jude since I've been married, and the kids have been doing it with me as well. And it was a teaching moment for them, because my wife reminded them, look what happens when you believe and you pray for somebody, So it had a major impact. And it was, I look back on it, and it was a great way to come in, to the church. I don't recommend it for everybody, because, some people may not want to do it that way, but that's just how I felt like it should be. And I wanted to check with the father first if that was okay and all that kind of stuff. And he said, sure. But our father had a charism of hospitality. He didn't have to spend the time that he did doing that extra one-on-one, and, and to ensure that I was making the right decision, because he knew that I'd been sitting in the pews. He wasn't there for the 13 years, but he had been there for the last 6 years and knew me well, and we were friends. Mm-hmm. And so, and then as you grow in your Catholic faith, and there comes to a time where it's like, now it's almost like a reconversion for me as I've gotten older, where it's time for me to go out and speak, and especially to men's groups, and be a part of that, and help people understand, and almost be in a position where I humble myself once again to tell my story, not only my story, but remind people of the importance of mind, spirit, and body, and the importance of St. Joseph, and the importance of having some charism, because we all are given that gift of charism. It's just a matter of finding it, of finding the charisms that can help lead people to God. And so those are the things that I try to focus on and talk about now is, here I am, here's my story. Don't forget important saints in your life like Joseph, St. Jude, and then the interesting part, when I started doing research on my own family, my dad's side of the house, my dad's side of the house, and this is all documented in the historical records of my family. We were one of the first Catholic families to come to America in 1632. We arrived on the Ark and the Dove, which was the Catholic boat that arrived in Maryland, which was a Catholic colony. Maryland was a Catholic colony. And my family's first priest, ended up being Bishop Carroll. So my family helped start a parish with Bishop Carroll.
Amazing.
At the time.
Amazing.
And so I was almost finding my heritage as a result of my Catholic faith again.
You mentioned you've come back multiple times to the charism of hospitality. Mm-hmm. That also is something that over the last 10 years has become really, really meaningful for me as well. That the phrase radical hospitality blew me away the first time I heard it. Why is hospitality so particularly meaningful for you?
Well, I think all people in our human side, we want to be asked to participate or embraced somehow to come participate in something. So I think it's just not me. I think we want somebody to reach out to us. We want to be embraced somehow. Everybody wants to be listened to, not talked at. And we spend most of our time talking at people. We're not listening. And I think for me, hospitality is that great opportunity to offer people something and be the one to be humble enough to say, here I am. I'm going to help you. Whether it's talking to somebody, if they've never been in a Catholic church and walking through the front door, or whether or not it's saying, hey, we're having an event. Can you come? And it goes back to hospitality, because when I hadn't converted yet, we had a men's club that our men's group and the wives would get together at a different house every Friday. And now sometimes I worked and I couldn't make it because I work crazy schedule in law enforcement. But that was a form of hospitality too, to say, hey, and oh, by the way, bring your kids. It's not, we want everybody there and playing together. And so that charism of hospitality, of being able to go to people's houses and get to know each other, that helped me, because prior to that, most of my friends were within the law enforcement profession, which is the absolute worst thing that you can ever do, is to get so hyper-focused that all your friendship and all the people that you relate with off duty are in the same cognitive biases that you have.
Wow.
It's stepping outside that and being able to work with people who have all different types of careers and experiences. And so that helped me immensely, is that law enforcement, we have to understand that we spend 95% of our time dealing with 5% of the population. So in our minds, we think that 95% of the population is that 5%. And they're not. 95% of the population are good people.
Well, we have to wrap up this conversation, and I don't want to, but a couple of rapid fire questions sort of then for you. You've mentioned your grandfather, and you've mentioned St. Joseph a number of times as your personal heroes. Are there any other figures, either literary or in history, or the saints maybe, people who are heroes to you that you seek to model or you come back to when you need either guidance or direction?
I love St. Augustine. I love his writings and his work. I feel like I relate to him very well also. He was always battling sin when righteousness and all those kinds of things, but he never gave up. So St. Augustine is somebody that I personally always kind of reach out to. I also am very fond of King David. And again, it's another person that had his own battles, but for him to be able to imagine being responsible for the writings that he did in the Psalms. And, I encourage a lot of people to look at those, especially because it's kind of a great playbook on how to behave, when you, just go to the Psalms and let those writings kind of guide you in your faith journey, because they've written about everything. There's nothing that they haven't written about that we haven't. That and Proverbs, what a great playbook for life.
Agreed. Final questions. Apart from God and your family, who do you now work to be a hero to, or put heroic effort towards serving and hope to make an impact on?
Besides God?
Besides God and your family, who are you here for?
I want to have a big role with men in particular and first responders.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a lot of men out there that were like me or are like me that are lost. Even when we find our way, we get lost again sometimes. So to be there to help, mentor, and first responders, I feel akin to, I've walked that life. I understand it, and understand that they especially need that faith side of it, and be guided as a spiritual mentor in order for them to be truly satisfied. They're doing incredible work that they do. But it's easy to go down a dark hole if you don't have your faith life squared away. So that resilience of mind, body, and spirit that I referenced earlier, that's my focus, is to try to get men and first responders in particular to refocus on those three areas.
Amazing. So now, last question. I do have to ask, as someone as busy as you are with everything that you've been through, maintaining that spiritual discipline, as you say, those spiritual habits, what are you practicing these days, or what has worked for you? What habits are you following in building up a spiritual formation?
Well, I think prayer life is extremely important. I've downloaded the Hallow app.
Okay.
And I use that as a guide on daily rituals and prayers that I do. I put them in my calendar so they come up, and I put them at different hours of the day, especially when I might be tempted. There's times of the day or something that you might be tempted to do something that you shouldn't do. So I'll put that up to reflect again. Those are the ones that I'm doing. I think for me, the fact that I'm writing now and speaking and doing so many podcasts on my own, that it's helping me. There's nothing like writing to help you reflect. And then when I write about it, I'm speaking about it as well. So you put those kind of things, those two things together, it really helps you grow in your faith and understanding yourself. So in many ways, I write and do these podcasts for not only others, but I'm doing it for me. I'm doing it to help remind myself that it's not about me, it's about others, and for us to all grow together in Christ.
Thanks for joining us. If this story connected with you, send it to someone. And if you want to chat with us about anything that we've said, send us a message at heroicmen.org/stories. Our partner at CatholicSpeakers.com has built the easiest way to book powerful Catholic speakers for your men's event. They are the #1 resource worldwide for event organizers and Catholic speakers. Book easily, confidently, and ask for several grants to support ministry to men. Visit heroicmen.org/speakers today. Come and share your journey in the Heroic Brotherhood, our online community for Catholic men like you. Get the app with the best Catholic media for men, including Heroic Men's original series, Be a Man. It's all free because an alliance of donors already paid it forward for you. Stand with us. Let's build the future of Catholic men. Will you pay it forward? $5 a month pays it forward for 5 men. Visit Heroic Men to stand with us. Because men like us, we leave no man behind. Visit heroicmen.org today.